The strange disappearance of a famous star. What really happened? The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because some stories don't just stay in the past. Some mysteries refuse to die. The parking lot of the Machu's Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan, sat unusually quiet on the hot afternoon of July 30, 1975. It was the kind of suburban restaurant where businessmen met for lunch and families gathered for dinner. Nothing about it looked dangerous. Nothing about it suggested that one of the most famous disappearances in American history was about to unfold. But at 2:15 p.m., a man stood outside in that parking lot, growing impatient. That man was Jimmy Hoffa. Hoffa wasn't just any man waiting for a meeting. He was one of the most powerful labor leaders in America, the former president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, a man who had built a reputation for both fierce leadership and dangerous connections. For decades, Hoffa had been surrounded by rumors of corruption, organized crime, and secret deals made behind closed doors. And that afternoon he had agreed to meet two men with deep ties to the mob. Inside his car, Hoffa checked his watch again. The meeting was supposed to happen at 2 p.m. But no one had shown up. Frustrated, he stepped out of the vehicle and walked toward the restaurant entrance, scanning the parking lot. The summer air hung heavy as he looked around, clearly annoyed. A few witnesses later said they saw him pacing, occasionally glancing toward the road as if expecting someone to arrive at any moment. Minutes later, Hoffa walked to a nearby payphone. He dialed his wife. His voice was irritated. "They stood me up," he told her. He explained that he was waiting for two men, Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, a Detroit mob boss, and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, a powerful New Jersey union leader with organized crime ties. The meeting had been arranged to settle tensions that had been brewing between Hoffa and certain figures in the mob. But the longer he waited, the stranger things began to feel. Witnesses later described Hoffa looking uneasy. One restaurant employee noticed him pacing more aggressively, as if something wasn't right. Then around 2:30 p.m. something changed. Several people in the parking lot saw Hoffa suddenly stop pacing. A car had arrived. The vehicle pulled up near Hoffa, and according to witnesses, he leaned slightly toward the passenger side window as if speaking to someone inside. The conversation lasted only a moment. Then Hoffa opened the back door and climbed inside. The car drove away. And Jimmy Hoffa was never seen again. At first, his family assumed the meeting had simply taken longer than expected. But as the hours passed and Hoffa failed to return home, concern turned into panic. By the next day, the FBI was involved. The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa exploded into one of the biggest investigations in American history. Hundreds of agents were assigned to the case. They searched houses, vehicles, fields, and warehouses across several states. The Machu's Red Fox parking lot quickly became ground zero. Investigators combed the area for clues, interviewing every witness they could find. One of the most critical discoveries came from Hoffa's car, which had been left behind in the parking lot. The vehicle showed no signs of struggle. But inside, detectives found something chilling. Jimmy Hoffa's briefcase was still there. His sunglasses were still on the seat. It was as if he had fully expected to return within minutes. The FBI began tracking down every person who had been in the restaurant that afternoon. They questioned employees, customers, and anyone who had seen Hoffa in the parking lot. One witness gave investigators a crucial detail. He described the car Hoffa had entered. It was a maroon Mercury Marquis. That clue would eventually lead investigators to a man named Charles "Chucky" O'Brien, Hoffa's longtime friend and occasional driver. O'Brien denied any involvement, insisting he had no idea what had happened. But when investigators examined the Mercury Marquis linked to O'Brien, they found something that sent shockwaves through the case. Inside the car, hidden in the back seat upholstery, forensic technicians discovered strands of hair. They were sent for analysis. And when the lab results came back, investigators realized something deeply disturbing. The hair belonged to Jimmy Hoffa. But that wasn't the discovery that truly terrified investigators. Because when they examined the rest of the vehicle more closely, they began to suspect that Hoffa may never have left that car alive. And what they uncovered next would lead them straight into the heart of America's most powerful criminal empire. The discovery of Jimmy Hoffa's hair inside the maroon Mercury Marquis instantly changed the direction of the investigation. For weeks, the FBI had been chasing rumors, interviewing witnesses, and piecing together fragments of that summer afternoon in the Machu's Red Fox parking lot. But until that moment, they had no physical evidence proving Hoffa had actually been inside the vehicle. Now they did. And the implications were terrifying. Charles "Chucky" O'Brien quickly became the center of the storm. O'Brien had known Hoffa for years. In fact, many people described their relationship as almost father and son. Hoffa had helped O'Brien build connections in the Teamsters Union and had trusted him with personal tasks and errands. But investigators now believed O'Brien may have been driving the very car Hoffa entered before he vanished. When FBI agents brought O'Brien in for questioning, they pressed him hard. Where had he been that afternoon? Who had been in the car? Why was Hoffa's hair inside the back seat? O'Brien remained calm. He insisted he had spent the day running errands and visiting friends. According to him, Hoffa had never been in that car. He denied driving him anywhere. And he denied having anything to do with the disappearance. But the deeper investigators looked into Hoffa's world, the more dangerous the story became. Jimmy Hoffa had been preparing to return to power. After serving 4 years in federal prison for jury tampering and fraud, Hoffa had been released in 1971 after his sentence was commuted by President Richard Nixon. But the deal came with one strict condition. Hoffa was banned from participating in union leadership until 1980. For most people, that would have ended their career. Not Jimmy Hoffa. Behind the scenes, Hoffa had been quietly planning his comeback. He believed the Teamsters Union still belonged to him, and he was determined to reclaim control. But that plan had made him enemies. Very powerful enemies. Many investigators believed that organized crime figures who had once supported Hoffa no longer trusted him. During his time in prison, new leadership had taken control of the union, and mob-connected figures had found ways to benefit from the massive pension funds and influence that came with it. Hoffa's return threatened all of that. And according to multiple informants, some mob leaders had begun to view Hoffa as a serious problem. One FBI informant later claimed Hoffa had even spoken openly about exposing certain mob connections if they tried to block his return. If that was true, it made him incredibly dangerous. The FBI began digging deeper into the two men Hoffa had originally planned to meet that day, Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano. Both men denied ever scheduling a meeting with Hoffa. In fact, they claimed they had been somewhere else entirely. Giacalone told investigators he had been eating lunch with friends miles away from the restaurant. Provenzano claimed he had been in New Jersey that day. Without witnesses placing them at the scene, investigators struggled to tie them directly to the disappearance. But rumors continued to swirl. Then another disturbing clue surfaced. A local witness came forward and told investigators something strange about the car Hoffa had entered. He remembered seeing not just one man inside. There were at least 2 people in the vehicle. That detail raised a chilling possibility. If Hoffa had stepped into the back seat expecting a quick meeting, he may have walked straight into a trap. Soon, FBI agents began focusing on a theory that Hoffa had been killed within minutes of entering the car. But if that was true, there was still one enormous question. Where was the body? Over the following months, investigators launched one of the largest search efforts in FBI history. They dug through fields, searched barns, drained lakes, and even investigated rumors that Hoffa had been buried beneath construction sites. One particularly shocking lead sent agents rushing to a Detroit suburb after a tip claimed Hoffa's body had been buried under a house foundation. The FBI tore apart the property. They found nothing. Then another theory emerged that was even more disturbing. Several informants claimed Hoffa's body had been taken to a mob-controlled facility shortly after the murder. And according to those whispers, the mob had used a horrifying method to ensure the body would never be found. But before agents could confirm the story, something unexpected happened. A new witness came forward. This person claimed to have knowledge of the exact men involved in Hoffa's final moments. And according to that witness, the plan to eliminate Jimmy Hoffa had been decided weeks before he ever stepped into that car. But the most chilling part of the testimony was this. The man who lured Hoffa into the vehicle might have been someone he trusted. By the late 1970s, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa had transformed into one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in American history. The FBI had spent years chasing leads, interrogating mob associates, and digging up fields across the country. But despite the massive investigation, Hoffa's body had never been found. Still, the theory that organized crime had ordered his murder was growing stronger. And then, a name began appearing again and again in FBI reports. Frank, the Irishman Sheeran. Sheeran was a longtime union official and a close associate of Jimmy Hoffa. 4 years, the two men had shared a complicated relationship built on loyalty, power, and mutual trust. Sheeran had worked closely with Hoffa during the height of the Teamsters Union's influence, and many people believed he had acted as a kind of enforcer when tensions with rival groups escalated. But decades later, a shocking claim would emerge that turned the entire case upside down. In the early 2000s, a former prosecutor named Charles Brandt began interviewing Frank Sheeran, who was now elderly and living in a nursing home. During those conversations, Sheeran allegedly made a confession that stunned investigators. He claimed he knew exactly what had happened to Jimmy Hoffa. According to Sheeran's story, the meeting at the Machu's Red Fox restaurant had been a setup from the very beginning. Hoffa had been lured there with the promise of a peace meeting. But instead of a negotiation, it had been a carefully planned ambush arranged by powerful mob figures who feared Hoffa's return to power. And the man who had been asked to carry out the job was Sheeran himself. Sheeran described how Hoffa was picked up by men he believed he could trust. They drove him to a nearby house in Detroit, a quiet suburban property that appeared completely ordinary from the outside. Inside, the house was empty. According to Sheeran, Hoffa walked in expecting to meet someone. But instead he realized something was terribly wrong. Moments later, Sheeran claimed he pulled out a gun and shot Hoffa twice in the back of the head. The body, he said, was quickly removed and disposed of by other members of the mob. If the story was true, it explained why no body had ever been found. But the confession raised enormous questions. For one thing, there was no physical evidence confirming Sheeran's account. By the time the story surfaced, most of the people who could verify it were already dead. Still, investigators decided to examine the house Sheeran had described. Forensic teams searched the property, focusing on a particular area where Sheeran claimed the shooting had taken place. Inside one room, investigators discovered what appeared to be tiny traces of blood beneath the floorboards. Tests were conducted, but the results were inconclusive. It wasn't enough to prove the story, and so the mystery of Jimmy Hoffa remained unresolved. In 1982, 7 years after his disappearance, Hoffa was officially declared legally dead. But despite decades of investigations, documentaries, and theories, no one has ever been convicted for his murder. Even today, new leads occasionally surface. Some claim Hoffa was buried beneath a stadium in New Jersey. Others believe he was cremated shortly after his death to destroy all evidence. Each theory adds another layer to a mystery that has haunted investigators for nearly half a century. But perhaps the most unsettling part of the story is this. The men who may have known the truth, powerful figures in organized crime, took that secret with them to their graves. And the last confirmed moment of Jimmy Hoffa's life still comes down to that quiet summer afternoon in the Machu's Red Fox parking lot. A powerful man waiting for a meeting. A car pulling up. A brief conversation through the window. And then the back door opening. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure you subscribe, because some mysteries are darker than fiction, and the next one might be even more chilling.